Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back after the cup of tea, and I hope you've all limbered up well for the second session, Understanding Markets, and investing. The first topic will be investing in medical technologies, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Andrew Elder, who practiced as a neurosurgeon before joining the Boston Consulting Group, where he specializes in global healthcare strategy across the full spectrum of healthcare, including biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, service and care providers, software and telecommunications. Now, Andrew joined Close Ventures in 2005 and in 2009 became a partner in Albion Ventures, one of the largest independent venture capital investors in the UK, and Albion manages some £230 million across 7 venture capital trusts, including a healthcare portfolio. So a very big welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Dr. Andrew Elder.
Well, thank you very much to the Royal College and to Sir John for the invitation in the first place. Does this reach the back okay, or do I have to kneel, sort of bend over? It's okay. It's of particular interest to me, I suppose, as a former surgeon. Medical technologies are things I've enjoyed playing with in the past during operations and on the ward. But I have to admit, since investing in medical technologies, my eyes have been completely opened to the amount of engineering and the engineering complexity that goes into it. I think as surgeons, we tend to just gloss over all the engineering behind it, and we just care, does this work in my hands? Investing in it, you have to really understand the differentiation of these products, and so I'm very, very much aware now of the impact of engineering on medical technologies, and I'm truly excited about the impact of engineering in medicine in the future. Actually, I think your big challenges is less around the engineering, though I'm sure there are plenty of those. The big challenge is actually around the medical professions and their adoption of these technologies and opening up their eyes to new ways of doing things, which I constantly butt up against as an investor backing these sorts of technologies. But I think there are lots of things that we can all do to try and improve that. So I'd like to just give you a very, very quick background on Albion. I'll skip through that. I then just wanted to run through a sort of state of the nation, if you like, of where investing in medical technologies is, not just in the UK, but in Europe and around the world, and hopefully paint a picture which is reasonably positive, I hope, although qualified, and we'll come to some of those qualifications. And then really sum up with some thoughts and lessons learned about investing in technologies and bringing technologies to market and successful exits. Let me just see if I can find, that's it. So just very, very quickly, as Sir John said, we manage about 250 million of assets, and we're a generalist investor, but healthcare is a very big part of what we do. And as we'll see in a second, it's a very broad definition of healthcare, but medical technologies is certainly a big part of that. We've got a very experienced team. We've done over 150 investments over the lifetime of the team since '96. And we have over 100 years of experience in investing in the team across 10 investment partners and managers. We have 2 dedicated medics in the team. I'm one of them. We have another radiologist. I was the cutter and the scalpel bearer. He was the photographer as a German radiologist. But we think it's very important to bring that sort of end-user experience to understanding medical innovation and technologies. And I've mentioned the balanced approach, but we, especially in healthcare, just to blow our own trumpet slightly, if I'm allowed to, Sir John, then we have top quartile healthcare performance based on our exits to date. So we have some experience of doing this. And just very, very briefly, this is a sort of breadth we have, everything from care provision. On the left-hand side here, we have psychiatric hospitals, rehab centres, dementia care facilities, all the way through services. And on the right-hand side really is our, I suppose, of more interest to this audience, non-regulated technologies, so that includes two of those companies are medical software companies and healthcare software, and on the far right, that's more the devices and diagnostics that are of relevance here. So just a little bit of context. There's a lot of doom and gloom about venture investing, and there's not enough money. There's not enough money early stage. I think there's some truth to some of those things some of the time, but I think the good news is that it's very much a cyclical thing. We've been through several cycles since this was published in 1991 from the Harvard Business Review. Everyone back in 91 was also bemoaning how venture capital has gone forever. It's never going to be the same. We can't get enough money into our startups, and 3i has stopped investing in startups. So it's not dissimilar to what we hear today. We've been through two big investment booms in the late 90s and the mid-2000s, and we're still here. And so I think there's some hope for optimism. And if we look at, I'm going to run through a few slides just to give you a state of the nation, but I won't dwell too long on them. But essentially, there is some money for medtech in Europe. If we look across the last 6 or 7 years, I think it's fair to say 2006 and 7 really are more the blips, but we're back to sort of business as usual, $600 to $700 million of investment going in each year. Average deal sizes $4, $5 million, that sort of thing. So 6 and 7 was a bit of a blip, like we saw also at the end of the 90s. But the general state of the nation is there is some money. The question is, where is it? Well, United Kingdom's not doing too badly. If we look along the bottom here, the x-axis, we've got venture capital raised and total equity raised up the left, so that includes more growth capital type investing. Well, the UK is not doing badly compared to the rest of Europe and Middle East. We are leading Europe. Germany actually has masses of debt-based investment in its medtech industry, mainly in the larger companies, and so it goes off the scale when you include debt. But the United Kingdom is still out there in terms of being the best place to raise venture capital. All this data, by the way, is all medtech today. We don't see anything outside medtech. But in context, we are tiny compared to what's going on over the pond. It's just a different ball game. So I think part of the lessons we'll draw out of this later is you can't just confine yourself to Europe. You need to think about the US. But there are some good things about this too, which we'll come to in a second. But this just gives you an idea of, even if you add all these European, sort of top 6 or 7 in Europe and Israel, it still doesn't even get much beyond here. So we're still just scratching at the heels in terms of the amount of investment around. So where's all the money going? Late stage versus early stage? Well, there's a bit of a trend down. I think it's fair to say there's people who say it's harder to get early stage investment. There is some truth to that. But there is still quite a lot around. We're talking 30 to 40%. It's not like it's gone off the scale down to 10%. There is still early stage capital. There is more going to late stage. But I suspect there's also a bit of a flight to quality, where in some of the frothy periods where there's lots of money flying around, things that maybe shouldn't get invested do get invested in. What we'll see here is just a little bit more discerning and a little bit more flight to quality probably. Though the early stage one, we do need to keep an eye on that and make sure that doesn't fall any further. So where's it all going? This kind of recaps, I suppose, just on where's it all going. UK leading the way in Europe. But actually this is more designed just to show that the red and the blue there are devices and diagnostics. Those are the main sectors within medtech that are getting the money. If you're looking at in terms of software, that's increasing hugely now, and we'll come to that as a trend. But software is increasing, but it's still a very, very small part, and service is also a small part. So perhaps not unsurprising, that picture. And also not unsurprising, this picture, though I will again draw on this in a second. But the big clusters, clearly, the academic clusters are where the money is going. That's not unsurprising. It's where the technology is coming out of quite often. But there is a point here around actually using those clusters well, and if you're not in a cluster, making sure you are in a cluster. MedTech tends to cluster, and when we go outside of the UK, we see a similar picture in Europe, where there's big clusters in in Switzerland especially, and that's because of proactive legislation and policy to attract companies to those areas. Ireland is another fantastic example of a very proactive medtech policy which has created a quite astonishing size medtech industry. And it's not there on the picture, but locating in Ireland, Switzerland, or in one of these clusters actually has huge benefits for these medtech companies, and we can come on to some of the things later. One of the great things about UK or European investing is actually that the relative capital constraint compared to the US, which is what we see here, US in grey, UK in green. These are investment amounts by round, and you see a very different profile. You just aren't investing nearly as much, there isn't as much going into UK and European companies as there is in the US. The old adage is very true, you'll get much bigger investment rounds in the US, there's more risk for appetite there. Interestingly, though, they still have to carry on and they fall off towards the latter stages. So actually the UK profile there is pretty clean and pretty good, and that's what we should be looking for, is that steady ramp. But what it means is we have to be more efficient, and the US actually, ironically, is now looking to a lot of European examples to see how they can do it more efficiently, because they've blown a lot of money with this approach, with this steep approach. They create bigger companies, yes, that's true, but actually their medtech returns are no better. And so they're using a lot more money to create bigger companies. In the UK and Europe, it's a more efficient approach, and it's not necessarily a bad one, because companies learn how to be more clever, if you like, with their pounds and pennies. One old adage is, in the investment community certainly, is that we invest for a 3 to 5 year time horizon. That really now has changed. If you're looking at medtech, it's 7 years. You can't really expect to be getting out a decent exit before 7 years, except in certain subsectors. And this really has become the norm. And if we look back before 2005, we'll see actually those periods around 2000 when medtech holding periods are around about 2 to 3 and 4 years. So it's quite a different picture. And we see this anecdotally in our portfolio and our exits. We see the same pattern emerging. One of capital resourcefulness is required partly just to get through these longer holding periods with no necessarily bigger exit at the end of it. So in order to maintain returns, you have to be able to be more efficient. One interesting aspect we touched on regulatory earlier is that actually the CE mark on its own is becoming a more important and impactful regulatory approval, and the US again are looking towards this, because these are all exits, med device exits in 2 periods, 2005 to 7 in grey, 2008 to 10 in green. And we'll see, in terms of US approval, clearly that's the benchmark. People want to try and get US approval. In the past, it would be very difficult to exit without US approval. But now we're seeing the emergence of companies who are selling themselves purely on the basis of CE mark, don't even go for FDA approval. And that's partly because of the perceived difficulty, cost, and time to receive US approval. More and more US companies are now coming across and looking to do CE marks where they wouldn't have done before, getting commercial traction in Europe where they wouldn't have done before, and then going back to the US with that experience. And the 5 times there just shows that it doesn't make any difference in terms of exit multiples. That's the average exit multiple in each of those categories. You can still get a decent exit with a CE mark on its own. So don't feel that US approval is an absolute must, but the use of the CE mark is certainly very, very important in a capital efficient investment strategy. The other thing stretching out time, I suppose, for all of us is the use of structured deals. It used to be that in a cash-rich acquisition market, people were just willing to pay up front for the risk. Now, not only are they buying their companies later, but trade acquirers are also putting structured terms into their acquisition and saying, well, we'll give you a certain amount up front, but a lot of the value is going to be in earn-out in years 1, 2, and 3. And that has become more the norm than it has done, than it was sort of 5 years ago. So if you're looking to get your money out quickly, you may well have 2 or 3 more years than you imagined before you're getting your money out. Even more requirement to be capital efficient to get there, otherwise returns are going to fall down. But you can still get good returns, there's no doubt. The medtech industry is an attractive one in many ways for investors, and it's why people still are investing, as we've seen, they still are investing in the sector. It's quite different if you're looking at small companies compared to big companies, and I admit this actually is US data, so it's not necessarily reflective of what we see going on in Europe, and we tend to be on the left-hand column there, the less than $100 million exits. But they do require less capital, as you might imagine. They don't take actually a lot less time, as you'll see there. It's 6 versus 7 or 8 years. And the upfront multiple is much less, but it's still pretty attractive. 3.8 times as an average multiple on a less than $100 million exit is a good one. So that's what's attracting people. Clearly, there's a bigger prize to be gone for if you're willing to put up the bigger amounts, and in the US, they have the larger, deeper pockets and are able to go for those sorts of exits. But it's not necessarily a better return on cash. So, some tips. This is slightly gone skew-if, but just pulling some of those themes that we've just touched on into some lessons and some anecdotal experience. We've seen the money is spread around Europe and the US. We've seen the longer holding periods, structured exits and so on, and the use of CE marking. Apologies, but it isn't actually quite lined up, I'm afraid. But I think the lessons really are on the right-hand side there. Don't just confine your search to capital for capital in the UK. I think of our last 4 or 5 fundraisers into health tech companies, they've all been cross-border. So there's a lot more going on between UK and European investors, and we're seeing a lot more interest from US investors coming over here for the more benign European regulatory and commercial landscape. We've touched on the academic clusters, and now clearly this may not be, it sounds quite banal here, go and locate an academic cluster because most of them will be there anyway, but actually this is more about using it better. And when being resourceful, locating an academic cluster is very, very important. We see quite a few of our customers getting huge benefit from not only being next to the finance, which tends to come to those academic clusters, but also next to those people who've been there and done it. They know how to get the grant funding, they know how to get the non-dilutive funding, they know how to access markets, and actually I think this is something we could all do a lot better, is as small companies sharing with each other their experiences. There tends to be a little bit of a standoff between them. They either don't want to share it, or they don't want to go and ask for it. And I just think that where medical technology clusters exist, sharing those experiences is very, very valuable. We've touched on the capital efficiency, and I think this is a very, very important point. We see so many companies who are coming to us who haven't really thought through or sensitized enough the amount of capital they think they're going to raise and how long it's going to take. And that has big impact on what valuation you might expect, and what types of investors you get on board. And I think all I'd stress here is be very conservative about how long it's going to take and how much you're going to need, and plan that investor profile in terms of starting off with seed funding, moving to angels perhaps, earlier stage VCs, and on up into growth capital and IPO. Plan that beforehand, because if you think you're going to require 2 million and get to 100 million exit, and then therefore command a 15 or 20 million valuation, maybe you're right if all that panned out. If that actually takes twice as long and actually takes 10 or 15 million pounds to get there, you're going to have a lot of very upset investors along the way. So there's just a sort of caution, if you like, of just planning that out and being realistic about what valuation and how much capital you require at each stage of the journey. And then this point at the bottom is a really important one. And again, Europe is better than the US at this. And this is because of our capital efficiency. We have to find ways to get to market sooner, to understand your customers sooner. And I've seen some of our most successful companies and exits be really resourceful here. And maybe it's starting off as services, maybe it's starting off doing development for some of your big customers, maybe it's getting a limited design product out into your customers' hands. But this is really important. And I think just expecting to raise money with no idea of what your customers really want is becoming harder and harder. But if you can show an investor actually what your customer thinks about your product from real data, they'll sit up and listen. A few other lessons learned just from along the way. Don't be afraid to change your plan. I think almost all of our successful exits did this. They either changed the model, whether it be a service versus a kit model. Oxford Immunotec changed from a kit to a service model in the US to match the customer requirements. Changing the plan, we exited an X-ray imaging company, Dexcella, which started out as a hardware and software design and manufacturer. In one aspect, in low-dose X-ray imaging, it realized it needed a new kind of detector to be optimal for its system. It then went about setting up a detector capability and commercialized that first. So that's a great example of getting to market sooner, more capital efficiently, and changing its plan along the way for a very successful exit. Understanding your market, this is a very key point when surgeons start dabbling and coming up with little inventions to help themselves. This is very often based around your own practice, and then they look to their own country. Very often they don't look beyond that, and practice in different markets is hugely different. The payer landscape, the reimbursement landscape is hugely different in every market. So really understanding where you're actually going to sell this and what that landscape looks like is very important. We've had big pain on the regulatory side, where you think you're in good hands with top-rated US regulatory consultants, and they go and drop the ball. Don't assume that because you've got regulatory consultants on your board or in your pay that everything's going to be smooth. It almost certainly won't be, especially with the FDA. And then just a last point. Sometimes just having a really heavyweight board of directors can pull you through. Clearly, you need to have good technology to be able to sell it, but we've had great experience here where just having a really strong board makes you look very much more impressive to big company acquirers, and they will pay dividends for that. So I think there's just a few tips to finish up on. I think that's probably it. So thank you very much for your time. Very happy to take questions.